quite noisy out here with the traffic, so we're going to go inside. The house is a building site, so please be really careful. We're just going to do the ground floor today. We will do another open day in due course when the building work has progressed a bit more and it's safe to go around the rest of the house. But today we'll just do the ground floor. But I will give a talk inside where it's quieter. So if you all follow us in. Do you want me to shut the door? Leave the gate open because we might have some stragglers. I think we will. There we go.
Thank you very much.
We'll go in, probably just about. One in, yes. Gosh, you think you're not going to fit people in, and then you realise the rooms are enormous. Welcome everyone to 195 Mare Street, also known as the former Elizabeth Fry Refuge. I'm Elizabeth Haskett, and I am half of the very lucky owners of this house. My husband Duncan, who isn't here, is the other owner. And this is John Bolter, our architect, and John has been involved in this house since the 1990s when it was a working men's club. John and I are going to give you a talk about the history of the house. I'm going to read you a little bit from this brilliant book, Sue, available from the Hackney Society, and all good bookshops. And John's going to tell you a bit about what we're doing with the house at the moment. So obviously, it's a building site. Please take care. There's holes everywhere. We can't go upstairs because it's too treacherous. But I think it's nice to see it in this state because you still get a sense of the sort of historic fabric of the building before we've done our sort of careful interventions. So a little bit about the house. How many of you here have walked past this house before? So most people here sort of have appreciated it at a distance. So the house was built in 1697 as a grand country residence for a man named Abraham Dollins, who was a merchant in the city of London. He was Dutch. He was a member of the East India Company. We don't know a huge amount about him, but thanks to John's archival research, we have his basic biographical details. He lived in the house for a couple of years with his family and then died. And it was inherited by his wife and then daughters over the course of the 18th century. So the Dollins family were here until about 1800. And then the house was sold to another family, which included Thomas Wilson, who was a Tory MP. At this point, I normally pull out my picture of Thomas Wilson, but I don't have it with me today. Just imagine a really grotesque fat Tory MP. Like Nicholas Soames? Yeah. Him, like the original Nicholas Soames. So, big guy. Not a good guy. He's like the anti-hero of the story because he was responsible for administering trusts on behalf of slave owners in the Caribbean, where he'd worked for a long time. He was also partly responsible for the Reparations Act, which compensated slave owners for their slaves in the 1820s. So we can all boo and hiss at him. There's a really great story actually that we found online that was written by a boy who lived in a pharmacy opposite in the 1830s. He said on the night that the Great Reform Act was passed, that's the act that extended the franchise to a wider group of men in 1832, Thomas Wilson shut these shutters in protest. He obviously didn't agree with the extension of the franchise to working men, and a mob, a liberal mob, I mean, if you can imagine such a thing these days, a liberal mob came up the street protesting at people who wanting people to open their shutters to show their support for the bill, and they threatened to burn the house down if he didn't open up his shutters. So he did. He opened them up and put lights in the windows to show, it's okay, I repent. So that's Thomas Wilson. He died in around 1840, and the house was inherited by his children. But by that point, Hackney was industrialising. So what had been a country retreat set in bucolic fields and market gardens had become, an industrial neighbourhood. And the house was sold by the descendants of Thomas Wilson in 1860 to the Elizabeth Fry Society. So you'll have heard of Elizabeth Fry, the great social reformer of the 19th century. She reformed Britain's prisons for both men and women, and she had a particular interest in the rehabilitation of women prisoners. And she had gone into women's prisons all over the country to institute educational reforms and so on. And in her honour, after she died in 1849, an organisation was set up, the Elizabeth Fry Society, to establish a refuge in her name. There was a huge public campaign to raise funds for the refuge, to which Queen Victoria and Prince Albert contributed, and the refuge was first established at the Triangle, just a couple of hundred metres down the road. But the premises there were quickly far too small for the number of women who needed help, and so in 1860 they bought this house from the Wilson family. And over the course of its time as a refuge, from 1860 to 1913, about 10,000 women and girls came through this house, some of them as young as 11. The refuge archives are in the Hackney Archives. You can go and see them. I'm hoping to digitise them and put them on the 195 Mare Street website at some point, but it's going to be a bit of an epic scanning job. The stories from the refuge are extraordinary. Some of them are in the archives, but you can also follow the biographies of some of the individuals who are named in the census and find out more about them. So I'm going to read to you about a woman called Susanna High, who was the first matron of the Elizabeth Fry Refuge, who features in this great book, available at all good bookshops. Susanna High. As the first matron of the Elizabeth Fry Refuge on Mare Street, Susanna High oversaw the accommodation and rehabilitation of young women and girls. The refuge was established in 1849 in honour of the celebrated Quaker and prison reformer. It was first located at what was known as the Mansion House on the Triangle, now since demolished, and moved to 195 Mare Street in 1860. It accommodated women and girls as young as 11 who'd been released from London prisons into the care of the refuge after serving short sentences for petty crimes. So the women and girls here had only ever served 6 months or less, and the kinds of crimes they committed might be stealing a loaf of bread or breaking a window pane, or in some cases being molested by a man. Elizabeth Fry had transformed conditions in women's prisons during the first half of the 19th century, introducing education and intensive religious instruction that supported women to find jobs on their release. After her death, her supporters mounted a public campaign to raise funds for the creation of the refuge. Susanna High, the first matron, was born in 1796 in the rural village of Drayton in Norfolk. By the time she became the matron of the refuge, she was a widower in her 50s. We don't know what she did before she joined the refuge, but she was subject to very careful selection, overseen by the Ladies' Prison Discipline Society. I have a particular interest in the Ladies' Prison Discipline Society because, bizarrely, my dad is a historian, and the first book he ever wrote was about women's societies, including that particular one, and indeed about Elizabeth Fry. So I feel kind of strangely connected to this history. My father, when he first came around, just said, "What have you done?" I was like, "But I thought you'd like it." Sadly not. The role was competitive because of the lack of good employment opportunities for widowed women in Victorian London, and Susanna must have impressed the society with her experience. She must have been able to evidence her Christian faith because the founders of the refuge insisted on the importance of Christian benevolence in rescuing the women. Susanna was appointed alongside a sub-matron called Jane Laves. Together they managed daily life at the refuge. They were responsible for feeding, clothing and accommodating up to 40 women at a time. So 40 women at a time lived here, and the top floor is where you can see the old dormitory rooms, which are sort of largely untouched in the subsequent history of the house. They've now been touched a bit more by us to accommodate my kids. They were responsible too for keeping track of the women after they moved on and rewarding them with a dress made by the refuge's residents if they'd stayed in their jobs for a year. The matrons did not tolerate disruption or immorality. They kept a close eye on the women, and the house still contains the matron's watch room next to the girls' dormitories on the top floor, which is a little cupboard with glass perched over the stairs where they were able to see the girls coming in and out. It also contains a little sleeping loft with a porthole window, so even when the matrons were asleep in their sleeping loft, they could peep down at any latecomers into the refuge. Many of the women were expelled from the refuge for being, and you see this in the refuge books, incorrigible. The annual reports of the refuge held by the Hackney Archives include letters sent back to the matrons by the women. One woman writing to Mrs. Tracy, the matron in 1862, says, "I hope, dear madam, that you will always remember me at the throne of grace, for I need all your prayers." No doubt selected by the refuge's overseers for their piety and gratitude, the letters reveal the matron's importance in the lives of the women. their continued desire to please the matrons with their displays of faith and good behaviour. We don't know how long Susanna worked at the refuge. She wasn't there in 1860 when Mrs. Tracy oversaw the move to 195 Mare Street. Subsequent census records show that Esther Booth was matron in 1871, Ellen Broadbent in 1891, and Elizabeth Barrett in 1901 and 1911. By the time the refuge moved to Islington in 1913, it had accommodated around 10,000 women and girls and employed numerous matrons whose names and stories remain to be told. So that is the story of one of the matrons here, and I feel when saying that story you can kind of almost sense their presence in these rooms because so much of it actually remains remarkably intact. In 1913, after the refuge moved out, it became a working men's club. It was called the New Lansdowne Club, and some of you, I don't know if anyone here ever came to the club. Yeah, some people came here. Yay! Some people came to the club, so we know we know quite a lot about it from people who've come to visit us since we took on the building, and they've told us about the kinds of things they did here. Lots of games and darts, and there was a billiard hall upstairs, and bingo nights and boxing, and the Cray twins boxed out the back. And that whole back wall that you can see that we have recently insulated was taken down by the Working Men's Club, and you could walk from the front of the house all the way through into a music hall that stretched to Cranston Avenue at the back. So it was a really sort of significant local venue for music and boxing. And then in 2004, the Working Men's Club shut down after a sort of period of neglect and difficulty that John was involved in trying to sort of help them sort out the building at that time. But they shut down, sold it to a developer, who sold it to another developer, who sold it to another developer, who eventually sold it to a developer called Carlton James. Carlton convinced Hackney Council to allow him to build the flats that you can see out of the back that are on Cranston Avenue. In return for being able to build those flats without any social housing or any kind of social charges, he sort of, what would we say, what did he do to this building, John?
He undertook to refurbish it.
He undertook to refurbish it. He did some work on it, most of which we have had to undo, because Carlton was a developer of generic flats, not a preserver, a conservator of 17th century listed buildings. So, but he made it watertight and kept it safe for me and my husband, the luckiest couple in Hackney. He came along and found it pretty much, I mean, not quite like this, we've done a fair amount of work ourselves, but still with so many beautiful original features and so many things, so many stories waiting to be discovered. I wish I could show you the things that we had found under the floorboards, but I sent them off to the conservators to be presented in a big museum-like box, and they haven't come back yet. But our next open day you will see those things. So we found some really amazing stuff, some 18th century pipes, lots of old tools. We found an accounting book from the refuge period that was probably used by one of the girls. We found face powder and the sorts of things you can imagine 1890s, 1900 girls, applying on the top floor. A lot of the things we found were either under the boards, and some of them were tucked in the walls, as if panelling had come loose and they managed to stuff things for safekeeping and then forgotten about them. Our greatest discovery, which you can see on our Instagram, was a large panel of probably late 17th century wallpaper in a cupboard on the first floor. We've taken that down and it's been sent to the conservators for kind of fairly intensive repair. We've shown it to the Wallpaper Historical Association and the V&A, and we've been told that it's extremely rare. The pattern's never been seen before, so that was a really exciting, sort of historically significant discovery. And when that has been conserved, we will be presenting it in the house. But yeah, so at our next open day, I hope we will have all of those things to show to you. So I think that's me done. I'm going to hand over to John. He's going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing.
In the basement.
Oh, in the basement, yeah. So our purpose for the house, in the end, is to turn it into a family home. So as I said, my 3 kids will be sleeping in the dormitories on the top floor, but also to open it up for community access, because we don't believe a house like this should ever be preserve of a single family. It needs to be shared with the people of Hackney, as it had been throughout the 20th century. And so the basement, which is a really sort of considerable space, it's this entire footprint of the house, will be used for creative activities of various kinds, so workshops, studios. If you have ideas about things that you would like to see done down there, just shout them out. I'm open to everything. And there's a yard that you'll see when we go outside, which comes attached to the basement, so there'll be a sort of public space for entertaining and carrying out outdoor activities attached to that as well. And when the work is finished, probably next spring, we will start having more open days and more activities going on in the basement. Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
So I've been coming here since the mid-1990s when the club were here, and it looked very different then. It was very open. This wall was open with no back wall. You could walk all the way through to Granson Avenue practically. There was just suspended ceilings generally. All the walls were covered in hardboard, so the panelling you could just catch glimpses of it. So all these things have been uncovered. The work the developer did, they did a lot of work, a lot of floor strengthening work was done, all necessary. You see these big steels have been added to these major timber beams. That work was all done with a view to it being office use, but then there was a switch once Elizabeth got involved to just simple the house, which is a much easier thing to accommodate. So the work we've done since then has been partly to undo some of Carlton's work and do it again, but also just simple things like getting all the services in the electrics, the heating, and fire compartmentation. We're putting in a second staircase. A house like this would have almost certainly had two staircases originally. It's quite a large staircase that you saw off the hall. There's always been some debate about whether that is the main stair or the secondary stair. And there's some evidence there was something in this corner over here. Still unresolved, but this is now going to have an opening. It's just temporary infill there, with a staircase from ground floor to the top floor, which is going to be a modern intervention. The steel structure, cladding, all that. Very contemporary. We've had to do a lot of work in fire separation because we've got to keep the two staircases separate so that you can escape. You can escape no matter which part of the building's on fire. It's all going to be underfloor heating, which is why all the boards are up at the moment, all fed from an air source heat pump, a large air source heat pump in the yard outside. So there won't be any radiators, which will help to keep it sort of as it should be. In the hallway, perhaps you will notice on the reverse side of that wall, one of the things we discovered when the paint was removed by Carlton was that there's walnut. Some of the panels have got walnut graining on, which is very unusual.
You can see it in this room here too. There are remnants of it, but it's easier to make out on the wall.
So although I've always said to people a panelled house should be painted, this kind of panelling would always be painted. It turns out it wasn't always painted. So it's an exception. And maybe it's because it's the very end of the 17th century. I suspect that Abraham Dullins was very old-fashioned in his tastes. So perhaps he was harking back to an earlier period, more like sort of oak panelling, but that's what you see at Sutton House. And yeah, the work's ongoing. Most of it should be finished towards the end of the year, at which point it'll return to Elizabeth as a home.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah.
So there weren't any plans or anything that we found, you know, from any decade or...
There are some, when the club were here, because of licensing laws, there are some plans associated with that. So there are plans of the sort of from 1940 onwards, but by which time it had been opened up a lot. You can see you can see a steel column going up here. There's a sort of massive steel frame holding most of the house up, because on the first floor it was just one room at one point.
Yeah, they knocked
Massive
down
room.
a lot of walls. These walls were all gone. We put that bit back in, which in some ways you know, normally if you have a grade 2 style listed building, you cannot knock down any walls, and so you can't do an open plan kitchen. But the walls aren't here, so it's like,
So how did it all stay up then? If
these
there's
huge steels. It's actually very solid, remarkably.
Which is now.
It is
Yeah.
now. You can bounce on the floors and it feels alright.
But until these steels went in to reinforce those beams, the floors were all very droopy. And certainly on the top floors, you walked about, the furniture was wobbling out towards you.
So when did it get listed?
It was listed in 1956.
It's only 50s, so one of the earliest, the first, yes, it's grade 2 star, so it's very early listing. But it's,
And the club carried on a bit after that, wasn't it?
yes,
When did the club open? When did the club?
1913.
1913.
Yeah.
Gosh, that was a long time.
yeah.
Yeah.
So they'd done most of the damage before it was listed. basically.
Yeah.
how do you manage that damage with the current sort of council boss and the listing people?
I mean, it's a project with a long track record. And has been a cause célèbre for a series of different planning officers.
Yeah.
But we have been fortunate, I think, in having very helpful and supportive planning officers, conservation officers. One in particular makes his life, this became his main purpose in life for a while, to deal with the developer and get this into sort of proper use. So it's actually been fairly straightforward, partly because so much, because it became so difficult with the developer. And it was like a share for them. Things started to be done the right way, not the wrong way.
Yeah, I think I'm a historian by training as well, and I think that gave the conservation officers a sort of sense of reassurance, and then we bought them lunch.
Always a good idea.
It turns out like nobody buys anyone in the local authority any lunch, so that was really easy. Then they were like, what's in our hands? So it's been great actually. They've been really collaborative and really positive, and we've worked really well. Some of the things they've suggested we've done, some of the things we've done, you know, they've come on board with, you know, so it's a good back and forth. And the building's on the Heritage at Risk register, which is maintained by Historic England, but once we're finished with the work it will come off that register, which for Historic England is a really great moment because it means that the house is safe. So what I propose doing is you can have a look in the hallway, have a look at the walnut panelling. We've restored one piece of it so far, just below dado height in the hallway, so you can look at that. I'm sorry you can't see the other floors of the house, but there will be more open days in due course. And then I'll take people around, perhaps in slightly smaller groups, and we can go around the side and have a peek at the garden. And oh, I should have said the mural on the wall is by a Brazilian artist called Tiago Mazza, who is a botanical mural specialist. We commissioned Tiago to paint that on the gable end of our neighbour's wall with our neighbour's permission, and indeed their support and encouragement. We did that about 18 months ago, and we chose a hydrangea from Vietnam to reflect the history of the area. That's a Vietnamese supermarket on the ground floor behind there, but also because many of you will know that Loddage's nursery was on the other side of Mare Street from the end of the 18th to the middle of the 19th century, and hydrangeas were a plant that they introduced into Europe, that they imported. So we wanted to reflect that story. We may change it over time. It may not always look like that, but right now we love it. So and people who go by on the bus are always sending me messages saying, "Oh, it looks really, it makes me happy, it makes me smile." So
It seems to weather very well.
yeah, it's all right.
A year ago.
It needs a bit of touching up. Some of the lime has come through from the render, but yeah, it's good. So,
Because then it's
I'm just looking at Emily house this morning on
Yeah.
Nice. But it gives you a good idea. You've seen some of the original
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Because they don't fit in at all. And
It was interesting. I wasn't expecting.
And then Milo was so tired that his tail drooped down.
That's what it is. So you just
once the trees are really mature,
who had bought this.
What, the back one or the front?
All of that.
But this red brick part.
That's me building some walls as a sort of folly. So there was a laundry building to a bit of private space so that it's possible not to be overlooked all the
So
time.
you built that up.
Yeah.
So how many floors is this house then?
Someone else just asked me that and I said 4, but now I think maybe it's 5.
You're happy with it?
Iron fist, never had any money with their parents. They had iron fists with their children.
Hi, I'm Yvette, and we're at 195 Mare Street. And on Sunday, is it Mare Street? Mare Street. Can we start again? Please, please. 195 Mare Street. And on Sunday, I'm really excited. I'm going to be doing a walk about the East India Company, and it's linked with Hackney. And this house was owned by one of the shareholders of the East India Company. His name is Thomas Dollins. And if you come on Sunday, we're going to meet outside Sutton House. You learn a little bit more about him.